When you scroll through laptop listings, it's easy to get sold on glossy photos and a big screen promise, only to end up with a machine that feels more like a portable workstation than a true gaming rig. I've seen too many friends buy a gaming laptop that looks great on paper, but stalls on the first demanding title, overheats on a coffee shop table, or drains the battery before the commute ends. That's why today's deep dive is all about avoiding that disappointment and figuring out if the Dell 16-inch laptop with an AMD Ryzen 7250 really lives up to the hype. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I spent a few days running the Dell through a mix of work tasks, creative software, and a couple of modern games that sit at the sweet spot of graphics intensive but not ultra high-end. My goal was to see whether it balances the needs of a creator designer who also wants a solid gaming weekend without blowing a hole in the budget. First off, the most obvious draw is the 16-inch WUXGA touchscreen. The 1920x1200 resolution gives you a little extra vertical real estate compared to a typical 1080p panel, which is handy when you're juggling Photoshop layers or multiple code windows. In practice, the touchscreen works well for quick UI tweaks. I was able to drag and drop textures in a 3D modeling app with a flick of a finger, something that feels clumsy on a non-touch display. The color reproduction is decent for its price point, but don't expect it to match a dedicated color-graded panel. If you need strict sRGB or Adobe RGB coverage for professional work, you'll want an external monitor. The AMD Ryzen 7250 is an 8-core, 16th-read CPU that sits comfortably between the mid-range and high-end tiers. In my day-to-day productivity tests, compiling code, rendering a 1080p video in Premiere, and running several virtual machines, the laptop kept up without noticeable lag. When I launched a recent open-world title at 1080p medium settings, the integrated Radeon 780M handled the workload, delivering playable frame rates around 4,550 frames per second. It's not going to let you max out ultra settings in the newest AAA releases, but for indie games, esports titles, or older AAA catalogs, it's more than adequate. Heat and fan behavior are where the real questions lie. Gaming laptops are notorious for turning the palm of your hand into a grill. The Dell's dual fan system kicked in fairly aggressively once the CPU and GPU crossed the 80C mark, which happened after about 15 minutes of sustained combat in the game. The fans produced a noticeable whine that can be a distraction if you're recording voiceovers or trying to concentrate in a quiet cafe. However, the chassis does a respectable job of venting hot air. The bottom stays warm but not scorching. If you plan to game on the lap for long stretches, an external cooling pad is a wise investment. Battery life is another practical angle. The 86Wh pack, paired with ExpressCharge, gives roughly 5 hours of mixed usage, a few hours of office work, a short gaming session, and some web browsing. That's realistic for a machine with a 2TB SSD and a fairly power-hungry processor. The ExpressCharge feature tops up from 0% to about 80% in under an hour, which is handy for a quick power nap between meetings, but you shouldn't expect to finish a marathon gaming session unplugged. Port selection feels thought out for a creator who also dabbles in gaming. 2 USB-A 3.2 ports let you plug in your favorite external hard drive or a wired controller without reaching for an adapter, while the USB-C 3.2 port supports DisplayPort Alt mode, making a single cable connection to a 4K monitor possible. The HDMI 1.4 output still caps at 4K 30Hz, so if you aim for a high-refresh external display, you'll need a USB-C dock. The backlit keyboard has decent travel and a firm tactile feel. I found the gaming-style zone lighting subtle yet useful in low-light environments, and it survived a few accidental spills during a coffee shop work sprint. Now let's talk price and value. The Dell 16-inch model sits in the upper mid-range bracket, not cheap, but significantly cheaper than a top-tier RTX 3080 laptop or a comparable desktop build with a dedicated GPU. If you compare the cost of buying a separate workstation for design work, a gaming PC for weekends, plus a high-quality monitor, you end up in the same ballpark. So the Dell makes sense for someone who wants a single portable device that can handle professional workloads and casual gaming without needing a separate desktop tower. For a hardcore gamer who insists on max settings and high frame rates, the lack of a discrete GPU means you'll hit a ceiling quickly, and you might be better off saving for a model with an RTX 40 series chip. Who should buy this? If you're a freelance designer, video editor, or developer who values a larger touchscreen for multitasking, needs solid performance for occasional gaming, and appreciates a sleek, business-oriented aesthetic, this Dell hits the sweet spot. It's also a solid pick for students in art or engineering programs who want a machine that can run CAD software and still let them unwind with a Match 3 puzzle or a